because part of it was tied to like secret ceremonies. Did people not even know what they were looking at? I mean, a lot of stuff just get like miscategorized. Like, you know,
and old Masons really weren't the people that were collecting this stuff. So a lot of it was just kind of the unwanted and the forgotten. And it wasn't until
there was probably also some
around
stigma.
1990,
definitely
92, that Julie and I met Herbert Wade Hemphill III, who's one of the founders of the Museum of American Folk Art, whose collection's now at the Smithsonian.
And he came to visit us.
I think in 91, the Smithsonian opened a show called Made with Passion. And Mr. Hemphill was a Coca-Cola heir who, his family was from Atlanta, Georgia, but he grew up in New York City in the 1930s and 40s, where a lot of interesting folk art was out there, but no one was collecting it.
So we had gotten his book, and he came to visit us. And the first time he came to visit us, we had just loaded up our truck to go to a flea market, and we didn't have hardly one thing still left in our shop, our little shop. That's when we still had the barber shop.
Right.
But we invited him to our house, and we connected on. He started telling stories about showing us a cane that he had found underneath somebody's table at the flea market. And we completely grooved on that and just realized from his book that the things that we had been loving, as diverse as they were, the new contemporary art,
the
lodge stuff, and old folk art, contemporary folk art,
tramp art.
I mean, there was this other person already collecting like that.
Sure.
And I don't know that we ever really called ourselves collectors. We just bought and kept stuff, sold stuff. I mean, it was
like a lifestyle.
All the old antique dealers we knew
right.
were collectors of some sort, and I think maybe we kind of looked at ourselves like that. But here was someone who was recognized by the art world,
right,
who it didn't matter to Bert whether it was made by somebody who was known or unknown, or if
right.
it was new or old. It was just all about the power of the object and the way that he felt about it, and that's why he collected it.
Right.
And we had never met anyone who looked at things like that, and it really
right.
gave us.
So he came to
charge.
visit us, and then we would go to visit him. I think probably around 91 or so is when we
first went to New York.
First
and visited
went
him.
to New York. We would go up for the Brimfield Antique Market in Massachusetts, and on the way up there, we would visit Bert in New York City, who lived on the Lower East Side.
Right.
And his apartment was just packed with incredible folk art.
I can only imagine.
And he collected Oddfellow stuff. He collected
great stuff. Period.
Great things. And his passion was that he liked going on road trips and going on summer trips where he would go and visit artists and buy direct from the artists. I mean, he had things in his collection that he bought from galleries.
Right.
But
he understood the idea of supporting the whole machine.
Yeah.
And it taught Bruce and I a lot. We've had a number of really great, strong mentors in how we think about life, business, everything. He was definitely one. John and Barbara Kaufman, when we first moved here, they had the Forest and Vintage Market just outside of town. Mm-hmm. They were the first people that we met, and they were retired jazz musicians that had this vintage antique junk shop, and they created their entire environment. They made music cassette tapes, and they were so positive and gregarious and wonderful, and the way they thought of business was a lifestyle, like you said earlier, and it wasn't about just having a business and selling stuff that you thought people would buy. It was about buying the things you loved,
right,
and wanting to share. Johnny would always give people books because he felt like it would change their life and they needed the book.
Right.
And you never heard them once ever talk about that they weren't making enough money that week to pay something. When we know having a business, it's not always a free ride. I mean, it's right. tough, but they always said, when you need money, it will always be there.
Right.
And we learned that early on, that we could continue to do what we do and it would always work out. It might not always be exactly like you thought it would be.
Right.
But you just had faith and you kept this positive outlook. And you presented this love for what you did and why you do it and the people you do it with and the things you do it with.
Sure.
And it those people with that and Bert Hemphill, I mean, I think that's what always drove us, that like, oh my gosh, we just do this because this is what we love.
Right. And
so when we were renting that other first gallery space, really, we also rented the upstairs of the adjoining building here, and we started housing the lodge stuff as we were buying out lodges and just having a good time, kind of having our own museum. And we would invite a few people who were coming to buy stuff from us. We might take them up there. Most everything was for sale, but it wasn't about that. It was like setting up stuff and having stuff and moving stuff around. But we started looking in this building because it was so original.
Right.
And the business had been closed since 1985, and we moved here in 1987.
Right.
There was one light bulb that somebody kept changed in here, but everything else was still sitting here, like someone just walked out one day. And we would look in the window as we would walk up the stairs to the adjoining building, because our building and the one next door were built in 1902 by two friends.
Right.
So there's a shared staircase and a shared firewall. And we would say, wow, that's a great building. Wow, that's a great building.
Right.
And so in late 93, early 94, somewhere in there, we were in Forest and visiting John and Barbara Kaufman. And they said, did you hear they're going to sell the Coward Paint Store? Which was our love of a building. And because that was right when the superconducting super collider had scrapped, and everyone in Waxahachie realized they weren't going to become millionaires, and the team become 4A.
So they decided to sell.
And so we called immediately, just the man who owned the building. We figured that out, and he gave us a price, and we said, we'll take it. And we'd never bought anything. We had to call back later and ask to see it.
Right.
And it ended up, we had talked about forever, like, let's do something with this building. We'd live upstairs, and so when we came into it, we knew it was completely doable, and the upstairs was the old phone company setting, and it was perfect for how we thought we might live. So it has always been like the perfect building for us, and we love it dearly. But that even more so fueled what we do, because when we moved here in 94, the first exhibit we had was Bill Daniel. He did the film Who is Bozo Texino, and it was his train car graffiti photos, and it was William S. Burroughs and his paintings. And we had right as we were buying this building, or right before, we had realized that we'd seen William Burroughs speak in Fort Worth, and we had realized he did paintings, and we were just kind of like, wow, he did paintings, and we've always been fans of his literature. So I think I just called up and said, hey, we want to show them. And William invited us up to Lawrence, Kansas, and so we went and visited him. And it was wonderful. It was like visiting your grandfather in his house, and he
drinking vodka and Coca-Colas. Several.
Bruce and William did. I did not. Bruce and William did, and Bruce drank under the table. But it was great. It was wonderful, and we asked him what he thought about having a show in Waxahachie, and he said it's as good a place as any.
Right.
So we realized when he passed away and there was a retrospective, we saw the catalog, and his first exhibit was what year?
1982 of his paintings at Tony Shafrazi, and then it said very last show was Webb Gallery, Waxahachie in 1994.
Wow.
It was beautiful.
So we didn't realize that we were his last gallery show, but...
So then it's just been nonstop. I mean, we just keep trying to let the art kind of tell us what to do, and the building tell us what to do.
Kind of come every few months. There's some interesting new discovery, and we've that's kind of what keeps it interesting.
Yeah.
And we're still going to a lot of flea markets.
Yeah, so I mean, I remember when I first reached out to you. I think one of the emails we traded was like, "Well, we're about to head out." Which means we're going to be gone for a while, right? And so, what does that normally look like for you guys? Like, it's probably changed over the years, but what does that look like these days?
I think that we travel somewhere every month, is what I realize, whether it be 1 or 2 days or a week, and rarely are we not gone every month somewhere. We probably go to about 4 or 5 big flea markets a year, where or driving trips where we're visiting a lot of shops and really looking and dealers and looking for stuff. It's the hunt.
There's a circuit. There's a flea market circuit that goes on across the country, and dealers go from the West Coast to the East Coast, and Brimfield, Massachusetts is 3 times a year, and the shows in Pasadena are going on, and then in between there's a lot of regional markets that can be good too. So you realize that if you go to flea markets, you wind up seeing the same people again and again, and whether it's people that have fancy stores in Los Angeles or New York City, or even the dealers, that it's kind of a nomadic lifestyle, and it's a lot of people who are kind of driven collectors.
And we go to a lot of areas these days that we really like the area. We'll maybe, we usually fit in an exhibit at a museum or an art museum or a historical museum. We have a whole circuit of our favorite food places across any area, because we're very food driven, as we talk to our dog about being. And so a trip for us is, it's kind of, and then we have a lot of podcasts we're listening to these days on the road, and so it encompasses everything. And I think it makes us appreciate what we do and where we do it. Waxahachie is a wonderful town, but if we stayed just here, it'd be
stifling.
It'd be stifling and very insular.
So we realized early on that it's kind of all about road trips, and sometimes the antique business is not so good. It's hard to find good stuff, and sales are down. But yet, it's something about it. Going out to a flea market that makes me feel good. I grew up. My parents used to set up at Canton back in the 70s, and so I grew up, foraging through all this antique stuff, looking for things that I was interested in. I would buy old swords or baboon skulls or old books. And my mom, and dad were set up trying to sell depression glass or something. And I would always wind up making more money just by buying something in the market and then reselling it that day than they did with all that glassware and stuff. So I think being bored at the flea market where my parents were set up, it kind of, I realized I got a flea market education. And to have a flea market education, it means that you kind of have to train your eye to look for that thing that you're really interested in and amongst all this detritus of all this other stuff that's sort of in the way. And so you kind of wind up thinking that way and thinking intuitively. But there's something about the culture of a flea market that I just really am energized by it.
I think when you were contacting us, we were about to start on a trip up to Ohio area. So we drive different routes every time. We love Kentucky. We love the town of Paducah, and there's a restaurant there we love. So we try to go through there. We love the ham region. We love to buy single barrel whiskey. And then we love Cincinnati. There's a lot of really great museums through Cincinnati area. The Sign Museum. There's a ventriloquist museum, and we love that area. That's a very rich area. We're still getting to know that area. And then we went to see the William Hawkins exhibit in Columbus, Ohio. And along the way we're shopping.
I feel like you guys should, write another book. It's a lifestyle book about these road trips, right? And planning routes for where people can go and experience.
There's a lot of art in rural places.
We have a lot of friends who ask us for tips all the time, and if we had it already written out, it probably would be easy.
I think there's something to going to see art in remote locations that you have to drive a long way, or maybe fly and then drive, or whatever you have to do to get there, because instead of just all the work being done for you and going to